The Commuter's Endless Tuesday. In 2009, a London office worker named David Shaw began experiencing something impossible. His Tuesday morning commute, the same train, the same passengers, the same conversations overhead, repeated itself exactly. Not similar days, but identical moments playing out in precise sequence. The woman in the red coat spilled her coffee at exactly 8:47 a.m. The man with the briefcase got on at the third stop and dropped his newspaper. The announcement about delays came at exactly 8:52 a.m. David experienced this Tuesday 19th times before it finally progressed to Wednesday. The first few times, David thought he was experiencing déjà vu. But by the fifth repetition, he realized something was profoundly wrong. He could predict every event before it happened. He knew the woman would spill her coffee. He knew what the man would say on his phone. He knew the exact moment the train would jerk and the elderly passenger would stumble. David started testing his situation. On the seventh loop, he deliberately missed his train, taking one an hour later. It didn't matter. He woke up the next morning and it was Tuesday again, 6:30 a.m., his alarm going off at the exact same moment. On the 10th loop, he didn't go to work at all. He stayed in bed. The next morning, Tuesday, 6:30 a.m. What terrified David most was that no one else seemed aware. His wife lived through each Tuesday with no memory of the previous ones. When he tried to explain what was happening, she thought he was having a breakdown. From her perspective, it was just one Tuesday. She had no awareness of living it repeatedly. David began keeping detailed journals during each loop, documenting everything that happened and his attempts to break free. He tried changing major decisions, creating chaos, doing everything opposite to his normal routine. Nothing worked. Every morning, reset to Tuesday, 6:30 a.m. On the 15th loop, David noticed something. A homeless man on his commute stared at him with recognition. When David approached him, the man said, "How many times now?" He knew. He was experiencing the loop too. The man claimed he'd been stuck in repeating time before. Different loops, different durations. He told David that loops eventually break when whatever event they're centered around is resolved or avoided. David spent the next 4 loops trying to identify what event the day was centered around. On the 19th loop, he noticed a teenager on the platform standing too close to the edge, distracted by her phone. David realized with horror that she was going to fall. He'd been so focused on his own routine that he hadn't noticed this girl standing in the same spot, at the same time, every single loop. He rushed to her and pulled her back from the edge just as the train arrived. She was startled and angry at being grabbed by a stranger, but she was alive. David went to work, finished the day, went to sleep. The next morning, his alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. It was Wednesday. David never experienced another time loop. He couldn't prove what had happened. His journals from the different loops had vanished, leaving only his final version. His wife remembered only one Tuesday. But David knew he'd lived that day 19 times, and that somewhere in London, a teenage girl was alive because he'd finally understood what the loop was trying to make him do. The hospital death loop. In 2013, trauma surgeon Dr. Emily Chen reported an experience that haunted her for years. During a night shift, she treated a car accident victim, a young man in critical condition. Despite her efforts, he died at 3:47 a.m. Then she was back in the emergency room at 2:15 a.m., the same patient arriving, the same injuries. She treated him. He died at 3:47 a.m. The loop repeated. Dr. Chen lived through the same patient's death 11 times, each time trying different procedures, before she finally saved him on the 12th iteration. The experience started normally. The ambulance arrived at 2:15 a.m. The paramedics brought in a 24-year-old male, severe internal bleeding, multiple fractures. Dr. Chen took charge, followed protocol, did everything right. The patient crashed at 3:47 a.m. and couldn't be revived. She called time of death, devastated, but knowing she'd done everything possible. Then she was standing in the emergency room at 2:15 a.m. The same ambulance arrived. The same patient. The same injuries. At first, she thought she'd lost time, that her exhaustion was causing confusion. But as she treated the patient and he died again at exactly 3:47 a.m., she realized something impossible was happening. The third time through, Dr. Chen tried different procedures. She was more aggressive with blood transfusion. It didn't matter. The patient died at 3:47 a.m. Fourth time, different surgical approach. Death at 3:47 a.m. Fifth time, she called in specialists immediately. Death at 3:47 a.m. What made the experience more surreal was that no one else was aware. Her colleagues experienced each iteration as if it were the first time. When Dr. Chen tried to explain that they had already treated this patient, they looked at her with concern. From their perspective, it was just one trauma case, and she was acting strangely. By the seventh loop, Dr. Chen was frantic. She'd tried everything in her medical knowledge. Nothing worked. The young man kept dying at exactly 3:47 a.m., and time kept resetting to 2:15 a.m. She began to wonder if she was going insane, if the stress had broken her mind. On the 10th loop, in desperation, Dr. Chen did something unconventional. Instead of following her usual assessment procedure, she focused entirely on one injury that hadn't seemed critical, a chest wound that looked superficial. On instinct, she explored it more deeply and found a small arterial tear that had been missed in every previous iteration. It was bleeding slowly into the chest cavity, not enough to seem critical initially, but enough to eventually cause death no matter what other treatments succeeded. She repaired the tear. The patient stabilized. His vitals improved. 3:47 a.m. came and went. He was still alive. Dr. Chen continued treatment through the rest of her shift. At 6 a.m., she went to the locker room, sat down, and wept. When she came back to check on the patient, it was still 6:15 a.m. Time had moved forward. The young man survived and eventually recovered fully. Dr. Chen never experienced another loop, but she couldn't forget living through his death 11 times. She wrote about the experience in her private journal, noting that she'd somehow been given 12 chances to save a life that medical protocol would have lost on the first attempt. Years later, Dr. Chen learned the patient had gone on to become a paramedic, inspired by the doctors who'd saved his life. She never told him that she'd actually saved it 12 times, that she'd watched him die over and over before finding the one injury that everyone kept missing. The wedding day repetition. In 2015, bride Sarah Mitchell woke up on her wedding day, got married in a beautiful ceremony, and went to sleep happily as a newlywed. The next morning, she woke up, and it was her wedding day again. The same date, the same morning, everything reset. She experienced her wedding day 7 times before the loop finally broke. By the 7th iteration, she'd memorized every moment, knew every word people would say, and had developed an eerie ability to predict exactly what would happen next. The first repetition, Sarah thought she'd had a vivid dream about her wedding, but when she checked the date, when she saw her wedding dress hanging where it had been the morning before, when her phone showed texts from bridesmaids she'd already responded to, she realized something was terribly wrong. She went through the wedding again, every moment unfolding exactly as before. The photographer arrived at the same time. Her mother cried at the same moment. The best man fumbled his speech at the same line. Her husband said his vows with the same emotion. It was beautiful and perfect and absolutely identical to the first time. That night, Sarah lay awake, terrified. Would tomorrow be her wedding again? It was. She woke up to her wedding day for the 3rd time. She tried telling her fiancé what was happening, but from his perspective, it was the morning of their wedding. He'd never experienced it before. Her anxiety about living it for the 3rd time seemed like typical bride nerves. By the 4th iteration, Sarah stopped trying to explain. She started experimenting. She changed her vows slightly. No one noticed. And the day proceeded exactly the same in all other aspects. She made different choices, tried to create changes, but every night ended with her wedding, and every morning reset to the beginning of the same day. The 5th and 6th iterations were psychological torture. Sarah felt like she was going insane. She'd gotten married to the love of her life 6 times, but none of them progressed to the next day. Was she trapped forever in her wedding day? Would she ever experience being married, or just endlessly repeat the ceremony? On the 7th morning, Sarah woke up crying. She was exhausted, desperate, and terrified. As she got ready, she noticed something she'd missed in previous iterations. Her grandmother's necklace, the something old she was supposed to wear, was missing. In every previous loop, she'd forgotten it, deciding at the last minute to go without it. This time, Sarah spent extra time searching. She found the necklace in a drawer where her grandmother had left it years ago, with a note she'd never seen. Wear this on your wedding day, and remember that love is about moving forward together, not staying in one perfect moment. Sarah wore the necklace. The wedding proceeded as it had 6 times before, but something felt different. When she and her new husband drove away from the reception, Sarah was certain she'd wake up to her wedding day again. But the next morning, she woke up in her honeymoon suite. It was the day after her wedding. Time had moved forward. Sarah never told her husband that she'd married him 7 times. She couldn't explain why she'd cried so hard when their wedding night finally progressed to the next morning, why she'd held him and whispered, "We finally made it." He thought she was just emotional about being married. Only Sarah knew that she'd been trapped in their wedding day for what felt like a week, and that somehow, finding and wearing her grandmother's necklace had broken the loop. The classroom hour. In 2011, high school teacher Marcus Webb experienced something that terrified him, a single class period that repeated 27 times. From 10:15 a.m. to 11:05 a.m., his third period history class looped continuously. He'd teach the lesson on World War II. The bell would ring, and he'd be back at 10:15 a.m. with the same students filing in. After 27 iterations, Marcus noticed one student who seemed aware of the loop. Together, they figured out how to escape it. The first few loops, Marcus thought he was having the strangest sense of déjà vu of his career. But by the 5th repetition, he knew something was profoundly wrong. Same students entered in the same order, same girl dropped her books at the same moment, same boy made the same joke, same questions asked at the same times. Marcus started testing the situation. On the 10th loop, he changed his lesson completely, teaching about ancient Rome instead. It didn't matter. The students responded as if he'd taught the WBOT lesson. Their questions made no sense with what he was saying, but they asked them anyway, at exactly the same moments. On the 15th loop, Marcus tried leaving the classroom. He walked out into the hallway. It was empty, silent, almost frozen. He could walk through the school, but when he entered another classroom, those students were frozen mid-movement. He returned to his classroom. It was 10:15 a.m. again. By the 20th loop, Marcus was losing his grip on sanity. He'd lived the same 50 minutes 20 times. He knew every word anyone would say. He knew when the girl would drop her books, 10:23 a.m., when the boy would make his joke, 10:31 a.m., when the period would end, 11:05 a.m., always 11:05 a.m. On the 23rd loop, Marcus noticed something. A student named Jennifer was staring at him with an expression he'd never seen in previous loops. She looked confused, frightened. When he asked if she was okay, she said, "Why do I remember you teaching this lesson before?" She was becoming aware. Marcus rushed to her desk and asked, "How many times have I taught this?" Jennifer looked terrified. "I don't know, 3, 4? It feels like I've been in this class multiple times, but that's impossible, right?" Marcus spent the next loop confirming that Jennifer was experiencing the repetition with him. By the 25th loop, she fully remembered all iterations. 2 people trapped in the same repeating hour. Together, they tried to identify why the loop was happening. Jennifer mentioned that she'd been dreading this class. There was going to be a test next period that she wasn't prepared for, and she'd spent the whole class anxious about it rather than paying attention. Marcus realized he'd been anxious too. The principal was supposed to observe his next class, and he'd been worried about his teaching evaluation. On the 27th loop, Marcus stopped teaching and told the class, "The test next period doesn't define you. What you learn defines you." Let me help you understand this material, not memorize it for tomorrow. He taught with no anxiety, no pressure, just genuine engagement. Jennifer relaxed and participated fully, asking questions she'd been too nervous to ask. When the bell rang at 11:05 a.m., Marcus and Jennifer looked at each other. Would it reset? Students filed out normally. Jennifer packed her bag. She smiled at Marcus and walked out. Marcus looked at the clock, 11:06 a.m. Time had moved forward. Jennifer came to Marcus after school. "That really happened, right? We were stuck in a time loop?" Marcus nodded. They were the only 2 people who remembered living the same class period 27 times. Jennifer told him, "I think we were stuck because we were both trapped by anxiety about what came next. When we finally focused on the present moment, the loop broke." Marcus never experienced another time loop, but he never forgot the lesson. Sometimes time traps you in a moment until you learn to actually be present in it. The highway exit? In 2016, truck driver James Patterson was driving his regular route when he became stuck in a loop on a 5-mile stretch of highway. He'd drive the segment, see the exit sign, prepare to turn, and suddenly be back at the beginning of the 5-mile stretch. This repeated 43 times over what felt like hours, but was only 20 minutes by external clocks. Other drivers seemed frozen or moving in strange patterns. When James finally escaped, his truck's GPS showed he'd traveled those 5 miles only once, but his dash cam had recorded all 43 iterations. James had driven this route thousands of times. The 5 miles between exit 47 and exit 52 was a straight, easy stretch that usually took about 6 minutes. On this night, at 2:30 a.m., he entered the stretch and everything seemed normal, but when he should have reached exit 52, he was suddenly back at exit 47. The first few times, James thought he was confused, that he'd somehow missed the exit or gotten turned around. But you can't get turned around on a straight highway. By the 10th repetition, James was certain something impossible was happening. He was stuck in a loop, driving the same 5 miles over and over. The highway should have had other vehicles, but James noticed something strange. He'd see the same cars in the same positions each loop, but they moved in jerky, unnatural ways, like video game characters glitching. A red sedan would be passing him, then suddenly be behind him again. A semi-truck would appear and disappear. James tried everything to break the loop. He drove faster, still reset to exit 47. He drove slower, same result. He tried to exit at exit 48 or 49, but those exits seemed to not exist during the loop. He tried pulling over and stopping completely. When he started driving again, he was back at exit 47. By the 30th loop, James was terrified. He'd been driving the same 5 miles for what felt like hours. His fuel gauge hadn't moved. The clock showed 2:31 a.m. Only 1 minute had passed externally, but he'd been looping for what felt like 3 hours. He started wondering if he'd died, if this was some kind of purgatory. On the 40th loop, James decided to do something different. Instead of focusing on reaching exit 52, he paid attention to the stretch itself. He noticed things he'd never seen in years of driving this route. A small memorial marker at mile 49, a faded billboard at mile 50, a peculiar dead tree at mile 48. At mile 49, he saw the memorial. It was for a truck driver who died in an accident at this spot 15 years ago. James pulled over, got out of his truck, and stood at the memorial. He didn't know why, but he said aloud, "I see you. You're not forgotten." When he got back in his truck and started driving, the highway felt different. The glitchy cars were gone. Exit 52 approached normally. James took the exit, pulled into a rest stop, and sat shaking. The clock showed 2:33 a.m. Only 3 minutes had passed. Here's what terrified James. His dash cam had recorded the entire experience. The footage showed him driving the same 5-mile stretch 43 times in sequence, the same landmarks passing over and over. But the timestamp showed only 3 minutes of recording. Somehow, he'd lived through hours of experience that had lasted 3 minutes in external time. James reported the experience to his company. They reviewed his dash cam footage and had no explanation. The video clearly showed the looping, but the timestamp was continuous. No jumps, no glitches. James had somehow experienced 43 loops of a 5-mile stretch while only 3 minutes passed in the real world. He never experienced another loop, but he never drove that stretch of highway without thinking about the memorial marker and wondering if he'd somehow helped a trapped soul finally move on. The coffee shop morning. In 2014, barista Nicole Torres experienced her morning shift at a Seattle coffee shop in a loop that repeated 8 times. From 7 a.m. when she opened the shop until approximately 7:45 a.m., the same customers entered in the same order, ordered the same drinks, and the same small disaster occurred. She'd spill a tray of drinks at exactly 7:38 a.m. After 8 loops, Nicole realized the spill was significant. On the 9th loop, she prevented it, catching the tray that had fallen 8 times before. The loop broke. Nicole had opened the coffee shop hundreds of times. The routine was automatic. Unlock, turn on machines, start brewing. At 7 a.m., the first customer always arrived within 5 minutes. On this morning, a regular named Tom entered at 7:03 a.m. and ordered a large coffee, black. At 7:38 a.m., Nicole was carrying a tray of drinks to a table when she slipped on a wet spot and the entire tray crashed to the floor. Glass shattered. Hot coffee splashed everywhere. Customers jumped back. It was embarrassing and dangerous. Nicole spent several minutes cleaning up. Then she was opening the shop again. Same morning, 7 a.m. Tom entered at 7:03 a.m. and ordered a large coffee, black. Nicole thought she was having the strangest déjà vu, but she went through the motions. At 7:38 a.m., she picked up the tray. She slipped on the wet spot. The tray crashed. Glass shattered. As Nicole cleaned up the mess for what felt like the second time, she realized something was wrong. This wasn't déjà vu. This was repetition. When she was back at 7 a.m. opening the shop for the third time, she knew she was in a time loop. Nicole started testing the situation. Third loop, she mopped the floor at 7:30 a.m., eliminating the wet spot. At 7:38 a.m., she still slipped on a different wet spot and dropped the tray. Fourth loop, she refused to carry the tray, asking customers to pick up their own drinks. At 7:38 a.m., another employee carried a tray and dropped it at exactly the same moment. Fifth loop, she closed the shop at 7:35 a.m. She was back at 7 a.m. By the sixth loop, Nicole was frustrated. No matter what she did, at 7:38 a.m., a tray of drinks crashed to the floor. It was as if the loop demanded this specific event happen. She started thinking, what was significant about spilled drinks? Was someone going to get hurt? Was there something about that specific moment? On the seventh loop, Nicole paid close attention to what was happening at 7:38 a.m. The tray fell, drinks spilled, and she noticed a customer's laptop on a nearby table that would have been destroyed if the spill had gone slightly differently. Whose laptop? A young woman who'd been working intensely on what looked like an important document. Eighth loop, Nicole approached the woman and asked what she was working on. A thesis, the woman said. Her entire graduate work. She was backing it up but hadn't finished yet. If the laptop got destroyed right now, she'd lose months of work. On the ninth loop, at 7:37 a.m., Nicole asked the woman to move to a different table, one away from where the spill would occur. The woman moved. At 7:38 a.m., Nicole picked up the tray. She felt herself start to slip. But instead of letting the tray fall, she caught her balance, steadied the tray, and delivered the drinks safely. She looked at the clock, 7:39 a.m. Time was moving forward. The loop had broken. Nicole finished her shift normally, but she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She'd lived through the same 45 minutes 9 times. The loop had forced her to spill drinks 8 times until she figured out why, to prevent a disaster that would have destroyed months of someone's work. When she finally prevented it, the loop released her. The young woman with the laptop came back days later. She'd finished her thesis and wanted to thank Nicole for suggesting she move tables that morning. Right after moving, someone had spilled drinks exactly where she'd been sitting. If Nicole hadn't warned her, her laptop and her entire thesis would have been destroyed. Nicole never told her that she'd lived that morning 9 times to figure out how to save that thesis. The accident prevention loop. In 2017, software engineer Alex Kumar was driving home from work when he witnessed a fatal car accident at an intersection. 3 people died, then he was back in his car. 5 minutes before the intersection, the accident hadn't happened yet. The accident occurred again. Alex looped through witnessing this fatal accident 14 times before he figured out how to prevent it. On the 15th loop, he blocked the intersection with his car, forcing all vehicles to stop. The loop broke, and 3 people who died 14 times in his experience drove away alive. The first time Alex saw the accident, it happened suddenly. He was stopped at a red light, 2 cars back from the intersection. The light turned green. A pickup truck accelerated through the intersection. A sedan ran the red light from the cross street at high speed. The collision was catastrophic. Metal crunched, glass exploded. The sedan spun and hit a third vehicle. Alex sat frozen, watching people die. Then he was back in his car, stopped at the same red light, 2 cars back from the intersection. The same song was playing on his radio. He thought for a moment he'd blacked out, that the trauma had confused him. But when the light turned green, when the pickup truck accelerated, when the sedan ran the red light, the exact same accident occurred again. Alex was back at the red light, third time. The accident was going to happen in about 30 seconds. He honked his horn, trying to warn the pickup truck. The driver looked annoyed but still drove through on the green light. The sedan ran the red. The collision occurred exactly as before. Fourth loop. Alex tried to call 911 before the accident. The call wouldn't connect. Fifth loop. He got out of his car and tried to run to the intersection to stop the vehicles. He wasn't fast enough. The accident occurred before he reached it. Sixth loop. He tried to drive around the cars in front of him to block the intersection. He couldn't maneuver in time. By the 10th loop, Alex was frantic. He'd watched the same 3 people die 10 times. He knew exactly when and how it would happen, but he couldn't figure out how to prevent it. The pickup truck driver was following traffic rules. The sedan driver, running the red light at high speed, was the cause. But Alex couldn't reach the sedan in time to stop it. 11th loop, Alex tried pulling his car into the intersection before the light changed. Other drivers honked angrily, but he blocked the intersection. The pickup truck stopped, annoyed. The sedan approached at high speed, saw the blocked intersection, and swerved around Alex's car. It hit another vehicle instead. Different accident, still fatal. 12th and 13th loops. Alex tried variations of blocking strategies. Nothing worked. The sedan driver was going too fast, too determined. Even when Alex prevented the original accident, the sedan's reckless speed caused a different crash. On the 14th loop, Alex realized something. The sedan driver was going to cause an accident no matter what. The loop wasn't about preventing the crash. It was about preventing those specific 3 deaths. He needed to clear the intersection entirely, preventing all vehicles from being in the sedan's path when it ran the red light. 15th loop, Alex pulled his car into the intersection and stopped at 45 degrees, blocking all lanes. Traffic stopped in all directions. Drivers honked. People yelled at him. Alex sat in his car, hazard lights on, refusing to move. The light cycled through several changes. Traffic backed up. The sedan approached the intersection at high speed, saw the completely blocked intersection and all the stopped traffic, and slammed on its brakes. The car skidded but stopped before entering the intersection. The driver, a young man who looked intoxicated, sat dazed in his car. Police arrived, responded to the traffic chaos Alex had created. They arrested the sedan driver for DUI. Alex was cited for blocking an intersection, but when he drove away and looked at his clock, time had moved forward. The loop was broken. 3 people who died 14 times in Alex's experience drove away from that intersection alive, never knowing that without Alex's apparently crazy decision to block traffic, they'd have been killed by a drunk driver running a red light. Alex paid his traffic citation without complaint. He never told anyone that he'd watched those people die 14 times before figuring out how to save them. The restaurant closing. In 2018, restaurant manager Maria Santos experienced her restaurant's closing shift in a repeating loop that lasted 12 iterations. From 10 p.m. closing time until approximately 11:30 p.m., the same events occurred, the same customers lingering, the same cleanup routine, the same small moments. But at 11:17 p.m., each loop, a homeless man would appear at the locked door, asking for food. Maria always turned him away. The restaurant was closed and cleaned. After 12 loops, Maria realized she needed to feed him. On the 13th loop, she gave him the food being thrown away. The loop broke. Maria had managed the restaurant for 5 years. Closing procedures were routine. Lock the doors at 10 p.m., wait for last customers to finish, clean, count the register, go home. On this night, everything proceeded normally until 11:30 p.m. when she locked up and headed to her car. Then she was back inside at 10 p.m., beginning closing procedures again. The second time through, Maria thought she was experiencing exhaustion-induced confusion, but the third time, when the exact same events replayed, the couple at table 7 ordering dessert at 10:05 p.m., the dishwasher breaking at 10:23 p.m., the same sequence of cleanup, she knew something was wrong. By the 5th loop, Maria had memorized every moment. The couple always ordered tiramisu at 10:05 p.m. The dishwasher always jammed at 10:23 p.m. At 10:47 p.m., she'd always start counting the register. At 11:17 p.m., the homeless man would knock on the locked door. In every loop, Maria's response to the homeless man was the same. "I'm sorry, we're closed. I've already thrown away tonight's food." The man would nod and walk away. The kitchen had a policy. Leftover food went in the trash at 11 p.m. for health code reasons. By 11:17 p.m. when the man appeared, the food was already in the dumpster. On the 8th loop, Maria started wondering, was the homeless man significant? He was the only random element. Everything else was her routine. But she'd already thrown away the food. Health codes prevented her from serving food from the trash. 9th loop, Maria tried keeping some food out of the trash, but by 11:17 p.m. she'd forgotten about it, had thrown it away during normal cleanup. 10th loop, Maria left food on the counter deliberately. When the homeless man knocked, she had food to give him. She offered it through the door. He declined, saying he didn't take food that was meant for the trash. 11th loop, Maria prepared a fresh plate before closing. When the man knocked at 11:17 p.m., she offered it. He said he couldn't accept food prepared specifically for him. It was charity, and he had his pride. 12th loop, Maria was frustrated. She'd tried everything. On the 13th loop, Maria had an idea. At 10 p.m., she ordered dinner for herself as an employee meal, something allowed by restaurant policy. She ate half of it during her shift. The other half remained, clearly her partially eaten employee meal, not charity or trash. When the homeless man knocked at 11:17 p.m., Maria said, "I ordered too much for my dinner. Would you like the rest? I'm just going to throw it away." The man looked at the half-eaten meal, clearly someone's actual dinner, not charity. He accepted it gratefully. Maria watched him eat. At 11:30 p.m., she locked up and walked to her car. She looked at her watch. 11:32 p.m. Time had moved forward. Maria never experienced another loop, but the experience changed her. She'd been trapped in the same 90 minutes 13 times because she'd turned away a hungry person. The loop only broke when she found a way to feed him that preserved his dignity. She never forgot that sometimes the solution to being stuck is to help someone else move forward. The library study session. In 2019, college student Jessica Park was studying for finals in the university library. From 8 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., she experienced the same 90 minutes 7 times. The same students sat at the same tables. The same librarian walked past at the same moments. The same group whispered at 8:45 p.m. On the 7th loop, Jessica realized another student, sitting across from her, was also aware of the repetition. Together, they discovered they were stuck because they had both been avoiding a difficult conversation they needed to have. The first loop, Jessica studied organic chemistry. It was her hardest subject, and finals were in 2 days. At 9:30 p.m., she packed up her books and headed home. Then she was back at 8 p.m., walking into the library, finding the same table, opening the same books. Second loop, Jessica thought she'd lost time or dozed off. But the same events repeated precisely. The girl in the red sweater dropped her pen at 8:14 p.m. The librarian walked past at 8:22 p.m. The group started whispering at 8:45 p.m., everything identical. Third loop, Jessica started testing. She moved to a different table. The same events happened in the same order, just at her new location. Fourth loop, she left the library at 8:30 p.m. She was back at 8 p.m. On the fifth loop, Jessica noticed something. A male student sitting across from her was staring at her with a strange expression. She'd assumed he was just studying, but now she realized he was staring at her specifically, like he recognized her. When their eyes met, he said, "This is the 5th time, right?" He was experiencing the loop too. His name was David, and he'd been stuck in the same 90 minutes 5 times. They compared experiences. Every detail matched. 2 people trapped in the same time loop together. They spent the 6th loop trying to understand why. Neither had experienced anything like this before. They compared what they'd been doing, both studying for finals. Both in the library, both at this specific table. Then Jessica realized, "We dated sophomore year. This is our table, where we used to study together." David nodded. "We broke up badly, never really talked about it, just avoided each other for 2 years. They had ended their relationship over text, never had the difficult conversation about what went wrong, never got closure. For 2 years, they'd avoided each other on campus. On the 7th loop, they talked, really talked, about why the relationship ended, about mistakes they'd both made, about resentment and hurt feelings that had never been addressed. It was difficult and emotional and honest. At 9:30 p.m., they hugged and wished each other well on finals. Jessica packed up her books. She walked to the library exit. She looked at her watch. 9:33 p.m. Time had moved forward. Jessica and David never became close friends after that night, but they weren't avoiding each other anymore. They'd had the conversation they had needed 2 years earlier, forced to finally address it by being trapped together until they did. The loop had given them no choice but to finally resolve what they'd been avoiding. Years later, Jessica wondered, how many people are stuck in repeating patterns because they're avoiding difficult conversations? How many loops are we living through without realizing it, cycling through the same problems because we won't address the real issue? The small town that reset. In 2020, residents of the small town of Millbrook, population 3,000, began reporting a disturbing phenomenon. Multiple people claimed that September 15th had repeated. Not just déjà vu, but actual repetition, living through the exact same day multiple times. Most people dismissed these reports until a local journalist interviewed over 50 residents who all provided consistent, detailed accounts of living through September 15th, anywhere from 2 to 9 times. No explanation was ever found, but the consistency of the reports suggested an entire town experienced a localized time loop. The report started on September 16th. A woman called the local newspaper, saying she'd lived through September 15th 3 times. The journalist, thinking she was confused or mentally ill, thanked her politely. Then another call came. A man claiming he'd lived through September 15th twice. Then another, and another. By afternoon on September 16th, the journalist had received over 30 calls from different residents, all claiming they'd experienced September 15th multiple times. What made the reports credible was the consistency. People who didn't know each other provided identical details about specific events that had repeated. A local bakery owner said she'd made the same batch of cinnamon rolls 4 times. September 15th kept repeating, and she kept making the same morning batch. A school teacher said he'd taught the same lesson on fractions 3 times to the same class. A mechanic said he'd fixed the same car with the same problem twice, charged the customer, and then the car was back unfixed, and it was September 15th again. The journalist began systematic interviews. Over the following week, she documented detailed accounts from 87 residents. The number of loops varied. Most people experienced 2 to 3 repetitions, but some reported up to 9. Strangely, not everyone experienced the same number of loops, and some residents seemed unaware of any repetition. What was most disturbing, the accounts matched. People who'd experienced the loops described identical events, down to specific times and details. The bakery owner said, at 10:47 a.m., a child dropped an ice cream cone on the sidewalk. A bank teller, who'd experienced the loops, said the same thing. 10:47 a.m., child dropped ice cream. They didn't know each other and gave their accounts independently. The journalist found no rational explanation. Mass delusion affecting dozens of people? But how would they all share identical false memories of specific times and events? Simultaneous mental health crisis affecting a large portion of a town? No medical explanation fit. Some residents reported that the loops ended when they made different choices or resolved personal issues. One woman said she'd been stuck in September 15th 4 times until she called her estranged sister and apologized. A man said he'd looped 3 times until he donated money to a homeless person he'd been ignoring. These accounts suggested the loops were personal, tied to individual choices or unresolved issues. The most chilling detail, several residents reported that on their final loop through September 15th, they'd noticed other people who seemed aware, making eye contact, nodding in recognition, like they shared knowledge that this day had happened before. These brief moments of recognition suggested that multiple people were experiencing loops simultaneously, occasionally becoming aware of others stuck in the same repeating day. No scientific explanation was ever found. The town wasn't near any unusual geological formations, power plants, or research facilities. September 15th itself wasn't significant. No historical events, no astronomical phenomena. It was just an ordinary Tuesday that, for reasons unknown, repeated for dozens of people in one small town. The journalist published her investigation, but it was largely dismissed as mass hysteria or hoax. But the residents of Millbrook know what they experienced. They know that September 15th, 2020, repeated for reasons no one can explain. And they know that for one day, time itself glitched in their small town, trapping people in loops until whatever personal resolution was needed occurred. Some residents still wonder, did time actually loop, or did they all somehow remember alternate timelines? And if an entire town can get stuck in a repeating day, how often does it happen without anyone noticing? Time loops shouldn't exist. Physics tells us time moves in one direction. Yet these 10 people claim they lived the same moments repeatedly, not just remembering, but actually experiencing them again with full awareness. The strangest part isn't that they experienced loops. It's that the loops had rules. Each person was trapped until they made a specific choice, a life saved, a conversation finally had, a moment of compassion extended. Only then would time release them and move forward. This suggests something deeply weird. If these experiences are real, time can trap you until you get something right. Not physics-based time travel, but a correction mechanism forcing certain outcomes. The commuter had to save the girl. The doctor had to find the hidden injury. Each person was stuck until they made the right choice. But what if they'd never figured it out? Would they still be cycling through the same hours forever? We only hear from those who escaped. How many people might be trapped in loops right now, unable to identify what will free them? And here's an even stranger possibility. Maybe loops happen constantly, but we don't remember them. Maybe we repeat moments until we make the choice we're supposed to make, but our memories reset so we only experience it once. These 10 cases might be rare glitches where consciousness stayed aware across repetitions. Think about moments where you felt absolutely certain you'd experienced something before. Not vague déjà vu, but concrete certainty. What if you had? What if you'd lived that moment in a previous loop and briefly remembered before the memory faded? The people who experience these loops can never prove they happened. Their evidence disappeared or shows impossible things. But they know what they lived through. They made choices with foreknowledge that saved lives or changed outcomes. And for reasons no one understands, they were given multiple attempts to get something crucial right. Maybe time doesn't just move forward. Maybe it stumbles and replays when something important hangs in the balance. Maybe do-overs happen more often than we realize. We just don't remember the earlier attempts. The next time you feel certain you've lived through a moment before, pay attention. You might be experiencing your second, third, or 100th attempt at getting something right. And whatever you do in that moment might be exactly what breaks the loop or traps you for another round.